Well, we know climate change hits poorer populations harder than wealthy ones, but international aid experts say there is increasing evidence women bear a disproportionate burden of the climate effects in the hardest hit societies. Our executive editor, Margaret Ryan, has been looking into this and has more. Good afternoon, Margaret.
Hello, Susan. Well, the United Nations Environment Program and the UN Foundation sponsored a panel today of experts drawn from international agencies and Washington think tanks. Now, they agreed there's lots of anecdotal evidence to support the thesis that women suffer disproportionately when climate disasters occur. But there's a dearth of data to support that thesis, primarily because it just isn't gathered that way. In many cases, government and international officials have just never thought about documenting the differing impacts on men and women. One preliminary study used proxies for people's relative power to adapt to climate or any change, things like education and income. Those measures show women in developing societies are less likely to have the wherewithal to change their fate. Men may emigrate or travel to find work, but women are expected to stay home and cope. Women tend to be the ones walking further each day to find water and firewood when droughts hit. Now, the importance of all this: international climate adaptation programs won't be successful if they don't realistically assess the impacts they're trying to alleviate. But experts said the realization of gender differences is recent, and there's little chance that much about it can be written into any Copenhagen treaty.
Okay, so therefore, what are these experts trying to accomplish here? Just getting the word out? Or?
Yeah, really, raising awareness. They're just starting. They're hoping to get more integrated into any follow-on from Copenhagen as they go along. I should specify this was held under Chatham House rules, so I can't identify the speakers and the agencies involved here. But it was many people who've been deeply involved in trying to lift populations worldwide out of poverty. And women do tend overall to be in the worst situations when you come to poverty. These people want to make sure that gender can be integrated as a consideration in climate aid programs in the long run. And they said we need to recognize that women in these societies also can be a very positive force. They can come up with ideas that maybe the experts hadn't thought of because they're the ones that are really experiencing the problems.
Okay, so you say there's no good data out there. What kind of information is needed then?
Well, speakers had a long list. I mean, they had obvious differences, some of which is already available, like differences in mortality and health impacts, disease rates. They said you have to look at climate change effects on individuals, on their social roles, on power relationships. All those things can be disrupted as the climate changes and the social order is changed. They said you need to look at how societies evolve the ideas of what's men's role, what are men's roles, what are women's roles, how that happened in the first place, how they have evolved, how they could evolve further, especially as the climate changes. And they pointed to different ways of interacting with the environment, that men tend to interact with the environment in essentially a money-producing way, you know, like logging, whereas women would look at the same tract of forest and they'd be looking for things like food and medicine. So, you know, very different ways of approaching it. And one big impact for climate change is reproductive roles. You know, how the shifting climate might affect those decisions. Will people have more or fewer children, for instance?
Right, so climate change really will and can impact population growth.
Yes, and vice versa. You know, and this is very key because it isn't talked about all that much, but 85% of the population growth in the last 60 years has been in developing areas, some of it in very marginal areas, which means there's increasing absolute numbers of people in places that are most exposed to climate change. You know, effectively moving people, you know, to the end of the runway and then saying there's more noise from the planes. Right. But one speaker said, look, we're looking at the largest generation in history that's of reproductive age right now. There have never been so many people on this planet who are making those decisions. She said there's a vast difference if they have access to accurate reproductive information and medical care. The most reliable way known to moderate population growth is to empower women to decide how to space their pregnancies. Wow. That's just plain it. And that happened in our country, and it produced a social revolution in the 60s. There's a lot of resistance worldwide. It's hard to talk about. It's not discussed in the Copenhagen Treaty, but helping people out of poverty, when you're talking about we want to get people out of poverty, we want to get them energy to raise their living standard. Well, the sheer number of people you're talking about, that's a moving target.
Right.
So it really does affect everything that you're trying to do under Copenhagen. The Earth's population doubled in 150 years to 1950, and it looks set to double again in half that time. Right. So, we have a whole different set of impacts on the Earth's resources and the environment, not just climate change, depending on how that trajectory goes and the decisions people make worldwide. So, it's a gigantic variable in any attempt to say what the effects of climate change are.
Do you get the sense this will be on the table at Copenhagen, or at least get an increasing attention?
I think where it's getting attention is in the agencies that administer adaptation and mitigation programs in these large UN and multinational agencies. They know that this is really a big factor. When you try to bring it up in international negotiations, there are always cries that, oh, you're trying to commit genocide. You want us to stop, and you want to keep all of this sort of thing. It's a very difficult, a very touchy situation to talk about.
All right, Margaret Ryan, thank you.